Okay, so welcome to this second session, talking around the background to our Wholesome Body, Wholesome Mind course that we're launching next month. And one of the areas that we wanted to talk to you today about was the importance of smiling, but in particular in the context of using tension as our teacher. We're all very familiar with tension. It occurs in all aspects of our lives, but it occurs also in our physical practice, and it also is present in our formal meditation practice. And we can have differing attitudes to tension. We can feel the importance of tension in terms of pushing through, in suppressing it, in dominating it, if you like, and there can be a feeling of achievement around that. And that can be present both in the meditation or in the physical yoga practice. But also we can choose to avoid it or to move away from that tension. And one of the things that we want to explore today is that we can have a different relationship to tension, which is hugely constructive and very powerful, and opens up the body and the mind to a movement and progress, which is really quite expansive and quite quick in terms of what it does for us both mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Sounds pretty comprehensive to me. But when we were talking about this, just in preparation for our session today, one of the starting places that we were identifying is generosity, and something that we were picking up actually in the classes as well this week around how our attitudes, the way we lean into our practice and the way we move through our daily life, we're carrying around with us perspectives and attitudes all of the time, and they are framing and they're framing our experience. And part of where we need to begin is to look to bring a more generous attitude into being. Now, this sounds lovely, sounds great. Yep, I'd like to be generous, but actually it's quite tricky because we can have some very sticky ways of holding ourselves, and those can come from so many different sources. It's almost not worth worrying where the sources are of the negative approaches that we have inside us. Just to give you some examples, we all come from a culture that has certain norms, and one of the phrases that's in my family past is the phrase "a Protestant work ethic." Well, what is that? That's a real attitude that you need to be driving yourself hard. Otherwise, there isn't a sense of value about who you are. So there's a kind of a cultural norm that becomes embedded in a family norm that then becomes embedded within yourself. And it becomes unquestioning. It's simply part of your framework through which you live your life. So I mentioned cultural, family, and then we've obviously got the contexts of our own life and where we end up and the work that we do and the partners we have and all of these connections where we're filtering and absorbing information all the time. And some things get really, really embedded within us. And some of that can be very helpful, but some of it can be very sticky and ungenerous. So this practice is very much about helping uncover the rigidity. Now, obviously in movement work, we're exploring the rigidity in the body and the tension. Now, in the meditation, we're also exploring the rigidity and the tension. And in fact, the beautiful thing about Sukhita is you're working with meditation in movement. So in this respect, it's quite different from many other forms of movement, including many approaches of yoga today, because we're working very clearly with tension in the mind as we are doing a movement practice. And that's why at the end of the day, it becomes a very simple practice. But to find the simplicity, you're going to go on quite a journey of exploration into how you hold this tension in your mind and how you hold this tension in your body. They're not separated practices. I mean, obviously, we do have a stillness practice where we start to leave the movement of the body behind, and then we're purely exploring our mental engagement with ourselves. But we begin the whole process either in stillness, on a mat, on a chair, or through the body in movement. But all the time, it's the same approach.
Yes, and that's an interesting point here, because working with yoga and yoga asana, one of the things that's really important is to realize that when we're in movement, what we're looking to do is see the stillness within the movement. And then when we're in our formal meditation practice, what we're looking for is to see the movement in stillness. And these are two bidirectional ways of working with exactly the same things. So in the practice of the yoga, when we begin to see the underlying stillness behind the movement, then the movement begins to change. Because what it does is what falls away, if you like, are the veils of these attitudes and rigidities of mind and thought and emotion. And it reveals a way of being with the body, which is very different. And then when we're working with stillness, the first thing that we notice is, as we begin to practice and expand our practice, is that stillness is a very dynamic place. Stillness is not static, it's mobile, it's energetic, it has movement in it. And when we begin to understand and see the patterns behind that movement, then we really begin to see what underlies that part of our practice.
So to give that a sense of, really kind of distilling it down, I think you can start to see from what both of us are saying is that tension is really, it's a really, really good thing to see. And we can tend to, like you said right at the start, we tend to want to avoid tension or push through it because we're not comfortable with tension. But actually, tension is absolutely where all the growth is. Because once we can find a way to meet it, and then we'll come on to that in a moment about the smiling, then we start to be able to move beyond what we already know. And that means move beyond the very aspects of ourselves that we find the most challenging. But you can't ever move beyond them unless you meet them. So we're in a bit of a bind in that sense. The only way that I see to move in the wholesome direction is to meet the tension. And that means meeting aspects of ourselves that can be really quite difficult, and some of them we're not aware that they're even there because they're hidden. They're kind of buried attitudes that are prompting behaviors that we may recognize, but we haven't fully understood what's driving them underneath. And it's quite it can feel quite unraveling at times, and I would even use the word chaos. So I think chaos is a very interesting place, and certainly when I first met it myself, I was quite frightened. It feels very unfamiliar. You're in unknown territory. and you're looking to land, and land pretty much to begin with back where you used to be, which is where you know you don't want to go in the future. So what's the thing that's most important to be able to meet this tension kindly? And you all know what it is because you've all practiced with us, and that is the smiling. And like in Hugh's blog this week, he described that this isn't high frequency excitement smiling. This isn't the kind of woohoo, everything is amazing and my life is wonderful smiling. That's nice when that comes along. But the smiling that's going to help us meet this really tricky tension is something that's much more quietly generous. You know, it's the times when you feel most resistance in yourself around meeting something, and you just remember, you've got to lift the corners of my eyes and lift the corners of my mouth. Okay, I'm setting a direction. I don't really feel this, because we're welded to the framework that we've carried all our life. But we're setting the direction to be generous, to move towards the wholesome. And then from the physicality, this and this, that can help us find the real softening around the brain that we talk about so much, whether we're on our yoga mat moving or in a sitting practice. So I'm going to let Hugh jump in about a bit more about smiling now.
Yes, one of the things that's really fascinating is that we can feel that we're in a sort of never-ending circle. So, you know, we're inviting ourselves to smile, but we don't feel like smiling. And yet we don't feel like smiling because, you know, we don't feel generous towards ourselves, and that generosity that isn't there because of circumstances. And we can get caught up in this circularity. And one of the things that's really important to recognize, and one of the things that's really the key to unlocking practice, is the fact that there's a physicality to smiling, which belies the underlying emotion. And this is critical. What has been understood for millennia, but what has now been looked at from a scientific point of view, is the impact of artificially smiling. And what's really critical here is, as Sarah described, the lifting of the corners of your mouth, the lifting of the corners of your eyes. This sends through the cranial nerve a signal to the brain, which the brain interprets as a genuine smile. And as a consequence, it reacts in the same way. And so it releases neurotransmitters which give a sense of uplift and lightness and pleasure and everything that we might associate with a smile in a genuine situation. So this is the key, which allows us to unlock this circle so that we can get in and begin to work. And we work by making the conscious choice to smile. So wherever we are, we smile. Whatever the circumstances, we smile. And it's not about telling ourselves we're happy. No, it's not. We're not trying to fool ourselves into thinking we're happy, but we are working with opening up the brain's response, which then gives us this space. It creates a space and an opportunity. And that opportunity is all we need to then begin to work with this releasing tension. It gives us the opportunity to interrupt the process. And we notice this in our physical yoga. We notice it in daily life. We notice it in the formal meditation. And actually, we can move this act to smile into our daily life as a daily life meditation. And the meditation, if you like, is it's a mindfulness exercise in the fact that we're remembering to smile. So that's the mindfulness. And then the meditation aspect is because as a consequence of that mindfulness, we then begin to see the patterns of action and reaction in the mind. And it's the awareness of those patterns that is the meditation, and it's remembering to do the smile, which is the mindfulness. So it's not that mindfulness and meditation are exactly the same thing. They're not. The mindfulness is the skill that we bring, and the meditation is then what we do as a consequence of that, and the awareness that we bring to our actions and reactions.
Well, one of the ways I like to think about this is with the kind of parenting child analogy, and the kind of ideal parenting that we would all like to have received and we'd all like to have given. And if you think for a moment about what you would most like to receive at the point where you're going into a place of real tension and not non-coping emotionally, and that might be because you're about to feel overwhelmed leading to tears, or it might be overwhelmed leading to a temper outburst. How would you like to have been parented in that moment? What would have actually helped you open back up and restore balance? And I think that's a very interesting reflection, because those can be the times when we've least received what would have most helped from another person. So as a child, you might have been told, just stop making a fuss, or this is completely inappropriate behavior, go to your room. And we might have been doing those things ourselves to our own children. So there are learned kind of modes of being where the parenting that we've received, the parenting we've been given, has in fact been supportive of a closing down within us rather than an expanding out. And it's quite a rare experience to have been in contexts where someone's held a space for you to open out right at the moment of real vulnerability where your behavior is going out of balance. That's quite unusual. And so the practice that we're engaged in is about doing that for ourselves. So whatever context we've had, whatever parenting we've received, whatever parenting we've been doing, if we have children or not, this is now our opportunity to do it for ourselves. And the great thing about that is there's no one else who's going to intervene now. This is going to be something we can really take forward in our own way. And it gives us some insight too, because we can often be carrying quite a lot of baggage around parents and the way we've been parented and what was and wasn't done for us. And when we start to see how we can make a change for ourselves, we can realize we're enormously fortunate to have met a practice that can give us this way, give us this route out of being so blocked. And our own parents didn't have it. They're just humans like us, doing their best. Some things they manage well, some things they fall short. And how were they parented as children? And who held a space for them and who closed it down for them? And so we can get out of a cycle of referring back and going, well, I'm like this because of that happened. And it can all become much more compassionate. And this is a wonderful transformation of our relationships, whether our parents are with us or not. We can reframe from a wholesome way everything that has been going on and everything that we're now in going forward.
So one of the things that's really important to recognize here is that this relationship, this use of tension, is one of the things that's very little present in many presentations these days around practice. And That's for a number of different reasons. If we look at our current physical culture, there are so many rewards around our relationship with tension, which is, if you like, aggressive, or uses it to push and to achieve. And of course, this gives certain benefits. If we've ever been inclined to do some form of physical exercise, like running or working in the gym or other sorts of sports, when we push through, we can get a huge reward, and that's a chemical reward in the brain in terms of achievement and satisfaction and other responses. But one of the things that's very interesting is that the smiling releases similar chemicals. But of course, it means that we have to meet what we would normally challenge in a different relationship. And that's where the difference is. And what we base a lot of this on is a form of Buddhist meditation. And the Buddha was very clear about his relationship to this. He was very precise in what he described. And he laid out the importance of tranquilizing our mind and tranquilizing our body as a physical activity, not as a consequence of practice, but as part of the practice. And this is something which I think is sometimes now has disappeared from some of the presentations. And the invitation there is within the practice that this is such an important part, and it makes all the difference, because it becomes what the Buddha described as right effort. This is the effort that we need to make in order to see clearly and to understand. And so tension, not only is tension the teacher, but it's the key that unlocks the wisdom that the Buddha described. So
and wisdom, I mean, the coming back to a little bit about the course we're doing, we're framing this course very much around how we can work with our own processes, our habits, the rigidity in our body, how we can find more ease and contentment. And that's a route to finding an internal peace and this grounded happiness rather than the super high frequency, I'm so excited one. But the wisdom that Hugh's also mentioned on the Buddhist path, there's a path that's way beyond what we're aiming for in this 9-month course. And this is we'll just mention it briefly here, the path of a liberated mind. And this is a path of awakening. And this path unfolds the more we meet tension kindly. Because what's going on is we're relaxing so much the tension out of our mind and our body, all that's unskillful, all that's unwholesome, so that you start to literally things drop out of you. And you'll know when this happens, because you start not to recognize where you are or who you are. Aspects of yourself are softening out and they're no longer needed. And this is a process of purification that's happening. The softening is becoming more dominant, and the tension is learning to ease out. And you can see that just like if we use an analogy of a home that you clean, to begin with, if you get a new home, or a new as in old home, someone else's, and you've arrived in it and it hasn't been well maintained and well cleaned, you've got a lot of cleaning up to do. You might have parts to be mended, sort of broken areas, big structural works to be done. And then you get on to, well, now we're going to paint and we're going to clean up the surfaces and we're going to have nice things inside and we're going to brighten it and have good flow around our space. Sound familiar with our practice? And then we start to kind of clean at a more detailed level, and surfaces become bright, there's no dust, and it's really, really clearing out, and there's no clutter anymore. And this is the path of awakening. The clutter of your mind and body is relaxing away. It's not that it's thrown out, it's not that it's pushed into a corner out of sight, it's that it simply starts to drop out of you. And so the Buddhist path goes a long way beyond where we're taking you, although we take you on, a number of the early steps, because you can experience in Sukhita yoga the mind easing out so much that your body starts to disappear. This is one of the stages of development in the practice. And that's kind of the point where you would, the physical practice has taken you that far. And then the meditation practice on the mat can take you further, because you then are meditating in what's called mental realms. Your body has disappeared, and there's a continued process of purification of the mind towards the unwholesome and towards what's finally called liberation.
So what's very interesting is we've been working with our teachers in India, and we've been doing a number of projects with them. And what we've discovered, and what they've discovered, is that this approach is enormously supportive to the meditation. So they have students who work with very advanced levels of meditation and within the mental realms. And what they've found is that working with the Sukhita approach enables them and supports their process, the process of that meditation. And so one of the things that's really good about the Sukhita approach is it provides the stepping stones to this much quieter and stiller approach to the mind and the body, which is then very supportive for deeper levels of meditation. But that aside, when we work with this tension in this way, when we work through the formal practice, what we notice is, as we become more familiar with this, we can extend this out into daily life, because movement on the mat is no different to movement in daily life. In fact, it's just a formalized version of that. And so we then begin to integrate this practice into all aspects of our life. And I think one of the things that we could do now is a short practice, which I think will perhaps help illustrate some of this. So if you can, I think it'd be very good if you could find a little bit of space so you can walk around. Okay, but if that's not going to happen where you are because the room's too small or whatever, then you can do this sitting down as well. So one of the things that I want you to do is, I want you to reflect, first of all, on something which has been an issue or a challenge. And one of the things that about this issue or challenge is that it hasn't been resolved yet. So it's still something that's ongoing. So I think we can probably all find something in our lives that has something of that characteristic. Okay, so I want you to inhabit that thought. So if you're sitting, allow yourself to close your eyes and be present with the thought, and particularly with the challenge of resolving it. Okay, and simply be with that. Now, if you're walking, just walk around your room thinking about this particular thought, this particular issue. Now, I want you to reflect how your body feels, where your breath is, how your mind feels, and the sensation of weight or density in your body. Now, I want you to stay reflecting on this thought. And now I want you to lift the corners of your mouth and the corners of your eyes. Let your body move if it wants to move. And then reflect for yourself on your posture, what's happened to your breath, what's happened to the feeling inside your head, around your brain and your mind. And the sense of density and weight in your body. Still reflect on the issue. And now consciously breathe through your nose. Stay with the issue and how it's not yet resolved. But keep lifting the corners of your mouth, the corners of your eyes, and breathe through your nose. And now gently open your eyes or come back and sit down. Okay, so what did you notice? Just gives us some feedback on that. So, Alison, perhaps I could ask you. Would you be good enough to unmute yourself?
I noticed two things. That I've never thought about lifting the corners of my eyes before. So that was interesting. The other thing I noticed that when I was thinking about that and about smiling, I kept forgetting about the issue. Even though it's sort of thing that keeps me awake at night sometimes and so on. But actually I could have kind of let go of it quite a lot. And then I thought, well, how can I do this all day? That's the challenge.
Well, one of the exercises in our course is just that, is to invite you to use smiling as a exercise during the day, particularly to notice when you're not smiling. Okay, so when that tension has reappeared, and to smile. And what's interesting is, although you're aware of the problem, it's no longer got that intensity of involving you whole, so completely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? And this is really important, because if we're going to find a resolution to something, the first thing we need to do is move away from this immersive relationship to it, where it's occupying everything and all our resources, to something where, because we need to bring those resources, help use those resources to help us create some other relationship to this. So just this very simple act of smiling is very, very powerful. And what did you notice about your posture?
I think I noticed that it was after you said to then smile and lift the corners of your eyes, that the body lifted and relaxed.
Yeah.
And that there was tightness in my hands when I was thinking about the issue, and that went, and I was aware of letting go of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it did affect my posture, yeah.
Yeah. And this is something that we notice very much in the yoga practice, the formal yoga practice, that we can have habitual patterns of holding that we're unfamiliar with. And then when we begin to work in this approach that Sukhita uses, we begin to see those patterns for the first time. Whereas previously what we would have done in our practice is simply pushed through or worked with the resistance to these patterns as part of the practice, rather than releasing them. Now, the difficulty about working with resistance is it reinforces the relationship to those patterns. It doesn't help change the relationship. And so that's a very important aspect. So anyone else like to comment on what they observed? Perhaps someone who's walking around.
Yes, I noticed an opening here when I started smiling.
Across the chest, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was maybe, it was kind of an awareness really that it was involuntary, but it was an awareness that I was closed, and I wanted to be released. I wanted to be more in balance, I think. But it wasn't a conscious thing. It just
No. That's very interesting as well. And psychologically, what did that opening? Did you notice any psychological change?
I noticed that some because I worry about what's going to happen next, you know, in life, and some thoughts came in, you know, more practical things like you can start going, look at certain areas, just look, you know, practical things, as opposed to, oh my God, what, you know, I know, but I yeah.
So this is bringing in more resources, you see. Whereas previously, you know, we were so preoccupied and we're so identified with something that we're very much in a closed environment. And this is enabling us to change that.
And when we're closed in the way, in fact, you've described it so well, Maria, when we're closed like that, we wouldn't see the stepping stones as things that might help us. And what you've described is you saw some things that could help. It doesn't necessarily mean there's the whole answer, but there are some practical stepping stones that you could give your attention to. And this is really good. And then that kind of insight helps confirm and reassure that this relaxing and opening is a skillful and wholesome direction for you. So this is the self-verification that starts to strengthen, that means you feel really secure about the practice supporting you.
And this is what in other contexts might be called the development of faith, in the sense that what we notice is there's a change, we confirm it for ourselves, and that gives us confidence and faith in what we're doing, and so we progress and commit to further exploration along this line. And this is an important thing, and it's an important aspect of the course that we're talking about, that this is a very practical course. Yes, you'll be given the information behind the practice so that you can understand it in the context of the science or in the context of the philosophy, if that's appropriate, so that you've got a language in which to frame the experience, but the experience is yours. It's not that you're being told what's right or told what things are. It's that you verify them for yourself. And that's what the Buddha described. He described this practice as a come and see practice, instantly effective. Just like you said, we've just done something for a couple of minutes and you've seen an instantaneous impact on that. So it's immediately verifiable. And these are all attributes of what he described as the context.
Well, one of the things I find very reassuring, well, lots of things, but I really like about it is it's a commitment to a direction in life, and rather than needing everything to be fixed and sorted. So we're learning to relax into a direction, and that in itself is a good place for our mind and body to be, because if we're not relaxed in a direction, we can tend to be needing an outcome to sort things out for us, and then that creates this separation between where we actually are and where we might want to be going. So staying in the direction. Nothing has to be complete, perfect, sorted, but the direction allows things to unfold, and we keep making an effort, the right effort that Hugh's described, in the direction. And then something else happens, doesn't it? Which you come on, maybe you're going to go whip through that document. The trusting in the process happens. So it comes back to where I started and talked about generosity. We can start to feel more generous to ourselves about what we haven't learned yet and what's maybe still quite problematic for us. It's like, well, I'm setting a direction. Of course, I've got all these habits and things of my past, and it's not all going to have disappeared immediately, because I need to be kind of constantly kind of engaged in my smiling, and I'm looking after myself, and we're coming back to this sort of ideal parent, and it takes a long time to parent a child. So we're now doing the parenting work for ourselves, and that feels good place to be.
Yes, the idea of being able to take responsibility, not in the sense of a burden, but in the sense of something that's uplifting and expansive, is a real sort of positive engagement with the way that we live our lives. And so there was something I was going to mention which has just flipped out of my mind. But one of the things that's very important is, just from this very simple exercise, to see how our body can be a map of our mind. So you notice the physical change in the body. And if we become aware of those physical changes and begin to listen carefully, and we call this soft listening to our body, then it becomes another way of relating to the way the mind is. And so we can then work with the mind through the body. And equally, we can work with the body through the mind. So if we release this tension out of our mind, we'll notice a freedom in our body. But if we work with the edge of tension in our body, then we can notice when we need to release our mind. And so this is where the yoga and the formal meditation become integrated. And because this releasing tension, this softening, this smiling, this is a parasympathetic response in the body. It's one that enables healing to take place. And there's no learning in fear, in fight or flight, which is the sympathetic. There is only learning in the parasympathetic. And this is why so many meditation techniques are look to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, this listening. So this is the yin, if you like, of the practice. And then we need to have the yang of the practice, because we can't just have yin on its own. We need yang. We need this balance of the masculine and the feminine. And so what we need is a sense of structure direction, support, but not based on tension, because tension is what breaks this process apart. And this is why the cultivation of the energetic body is so critical, because through the energetic body, we find structure, we find support, we find direction, whilst the body remains soft. And so with the Sukhita approach, what we get is this marrying of yin and yang together in one practice. And this is very consistent with the Buddhist philosophy and teaching, because in Buddhism, they talk about samatha vipassana. And in many presentations of meditation, these are separated out. Samatha being calm and introspection, if you like, and settling and stilling of the mind, and vipassana being insight. And you could see insight as the yang and samatha as the yin, and this, you can separate out the practices a little bit like you can separate out yin yoga as a practice and then a yang manifestation of yoga as a practice. But the Buddha was very insistent. When you look up the word samatha and you look up the word vipassana in the original suttas, they are always in a combined statement. It is always samatha vipassana as a combined noun. And so from his point of view, it was important to create this balance between what we would call yin and what we then call yang within a single practice, not to separate them out. And one of the ways that we've developed this is by cultivating the energetic body. And with the energetic body, we leave the tension behind. And that's part of the path of exploration that we would describe and develop over time.
Towards, and that's the aspect that's towards the wholesome body.
Yes.
Because the more you are inhabiting this energetic body, you have a natural structure, a natural support, you are naturally aligned with earth energies, you are in tune with your own life force, and you're feeling this expansiveness internally. There's more space inside. And it's a very, very dynamic place. You know, you've all had the benefit of seeing the way Hugh moves in classes, and there's a lightness to him which is pretty age-defying, and that's because his movement is coming from an energetic place. And a lot of the time, his practice, I don't know if you, I mean, this is what you shared with me, you're aware of the movement of space and the arising, the first moments of tension. But basically, your awareness is with the earth and with an energetic movement, and you're not in a clunky awareness of body anymore. That's how I understand it's evolved. For me, I'm more in and out. So there are times when I'm free and there's a movement of space and I'm with the earth and with my center, and it's disappeared. But there are also quite a lot of times when I'm still very much in the physical body, and I'm moving kind of between them. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, yes, because not to say that this is an aspect that to hold on to. Because if I'm working with a physical posture, which is at the edge of my capacity, then I'll notice myself coming back into the physicality again. But what it teaches me is that if I only think of it in terms of the physical, this is not the right route. So I'm back into the physicality, but the direction I'm moving in my practice is towards the energetic. So it gives me a sense of direction. This is why the energetic gives direction to practice. It gives me a direction to develop. And so with this approach in Sukhita, what you end up with is a self-teaching approach, because when tension is present, it's like a teacher's on your shoulder going, no, you need to think about this a little bit more carefully, because tension isn't the root. So it's self-correcting because the removing of the tension is the direction you want to be moving in. And then when we remove tension out of our practice, it becomes self-healing.
And there's an important aspect to what we're describing here, which is the point of the practice isn't to be able to fly through the air and float. This is a byproduct of the tension dropping away, so you're less attached to the physicality of your body. So your listening has changed. So that the purpose of it, if you like, is to help you with this process of releasing tension and to become familiar with the benefit, if you like, of being less attached to these structures that are unwholesome. And as you begin to trust that, your awareness moves more with your energetic body rather than with the physicality of the body. So we're not trying to make extraordinary shapes from being in an energetic body. It's not about a performance in that sense, because like we said, where you go after this is more into the mental realms. And so it's still a process of releasing tension. And then there is no body that's moving. The body is still, and you're not even aware of it. So the movement practice is a great preparation for where you can go after that. And just to sort of summarize in one way, the whole of the Buddha's teaching is about the relief of suffering. And we haven't mentioned that. We talked about wholesome body, wholesome mind, and tension and smiling. Why would we do any of that? Why was he investigating? What was the nature of mind? Why was he exploring any of it? The relief of suffering. And what do we mean by even that? Suffering, it sounds very intense. And sometimes we can relate to the idea of, oh, life is all terrible and suffering. But sometimes it's just that there are sticky patches and there are bits we don't understand. There's a lack of ease. We don't feel balanced in ourselves. Suffering encompasses all of that. It's kind of, what am I not in balance with? Why am I struggling? And this path helps. And the ultimate, which I referred to earlier, the awakened mind is a mind that's moved basically beyond any attachment at all. It's free of all of it. It has no anger in it anymore, and no jealousy, it has no doubt, it has no laziness. It's all softened out. So there's quite a way to go, and that's why, and that's basically where a monastic practice is taking you. You're working at more and more subtle layers of identity and these aspects that we're all familiar with that can feel challenging. But our place is starting with, let's work at bringing up the wholesome. Let's find our energetic body. Let's start to soften out our attachments to the rigidity in our body. Let's start to ease out the mind and relax around our hearts so we can feel more generous. And we've got this kind parent within us now that's going to hold our hand around what feels difficult, the low mood, and all of the other stuff. And set a direction that's really, really wholesome for the mind as well as the body. And that's where we can go with the practice, and that's what the course is about, developing over a period of time.
Yeah. I can't emphasize enough that this is not about developing extraordinary physical capacity.
Sorry, could you say that again?
It's not about developing extraordinary physical capacity.
Okay.
This is about maximizing the physical capacity that we have as an individual, because the way our relationship to our body, the relationship to our emotions restricts our innate capacity, and to recognize that as we age, that capacity diminishes. But the relevance of this teaching does not. And one of my past students, we continue to work with this all the way through, right through till 4 days before she died in hospice. It was as relevant when she had full physical capacity as when she had almost no physical capacity. This is a practice for life, not just for, if you like, the gym. It's not that. It's not that. So what I've had some feedback from the previous presentation that we did that we could share a little bit around the structure of the course. So what I thought I'd do is I'd just share a screen with you, which just briefly shows you the areas that we'd be covering, and you'll see how we're mentioning a lot of those right now. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So, are you able to see the screen now? Can you see a document? Yes. Okay. So, the first weekend is basically where are we going and how do we start? And this is around the yoga of loving kindness and the foundation of generosity.
And there'll be, just to say, because obviously this is a small framework, there's a lot of practice in this course. And then we'll be bringing in discussion opportunity, and then there'll be descriptions like Hugh's mentioned, bringing in the philosophy and the science.
But I would describe this as 50% at least actual practice. One of the things that the Buddha described as being enormously important is that understanding comes from two things: the framework behind it and the actual seeing for yourself. And you can't do that without having both of those components. And so this is very much about creating the opportunity for you to be able to see clearly through your own practice, and then putting together the framework that explains and puts in context what it is you've seen. The second weekend, what is holding us back? And that's really beginning to explore the origins of tension and why they are a teacher, and the basis behind that. The third weekend is the path to harmonious balance, beyond what we think we know. And this is what's really important to recognize, that certainly from a Western perspective, we don't have the vocabulary or the understanding of the development of consciousness that's present in many Eastern teachings, and how that development of consciousness comes through and the way that we can develop it. So understanding that there's a whole psychological, emotional, physical path of development that we can go through in this practice. Fourth weekend, stepping stones of awareness. Understanding, if you like, what is the essence of the practice and what's the inessential. So being able to distinguish between those. And one of the things that we've alluded to today is that the sheer physicality, the shape, is unessential. And yet so much yoga, perhaps in the West, is being increasingly dominated by the appearance of the practice. This is not an essential. And understanding what is essential and what is not essential, and so that we direct our effort where it's needed. The fifth weekend, we called this the secrets of Buddhist cognition, because the cognitive framework that the Buddha described, and he described it from a place of observation, not a theory. He would not describe himself as a philosopher. He was not interested in theory. He was interested in observable reality. He would also not describe himself as a religion, because he wasn't interested in that aspect of faith or other constructs. He was only interested in what you could observe and understand and verify for yourself. And that is what he then described as having faith to continue. Getting out of the way. When we begin to understand the patterns behind what's happening and the structures that are present, then we begin to realize that the thing that's really the issue is the way that we get in our own way and how we need to be able to work differently. And then the seventh week, this stage, there are always lots of questions. And so this is a weekend dedicated to, if you like, filling in around those questions. What does it mean to have a self? And when is self-expression useful and helpful, and when is it not? And simple questions, and hopefully at this stage, increasingly simple answers. And then the eighth weekend is a weekend retreat. This is a deep immersion, taking all that you've learned into a deep practice with, clearly support around that, but learning to go deeper into what we've really been exploring and understanding. And then the final weekend is understanding what you've learned and the path forward. And each weekend have approximate 50-50 balance of knowledge and seeing, apart from the retreat. The retreat weekend is almost entirely practical with a couple of talks. I think what I've said here is the most helpful thing here. Each weekend will have an approximate 50-50 balance of knowledge and seeing. Knowledge comes through the presentation and discussion of the framework underlying the seeing in the form of direct experience through practice. This leads to understanding what the Buddha called wisdom. And then if I just share this page with you, this is off our website, Wholesome Body, Wholesome Mind course, and each weekend has 10 hours, and it's once a month. And I'll just scroll down here. We also have in between each weekend, we have a period.
We can't see the web page, Hugh. We're still on the document, the web.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So.
Thanks, Maria.
Okay, so let me just go back here and I shall share. Okay. So this is the page off the website. Okay. And each weekend is 10 hours. These are the dates of the weekend. And in between each weekend, there is a review where we have an opportunity to, or you as participants would have an opportunity to bring any questions you had from the previous weekend, discuss them so that they're not, if you like, waiting for the following weekend to resolve or discuss, so that we're well prepared for the following weekend. So that's a very brief outline. Any questions that you have? Any questions around what we've discussed today? Yes.
Maria, you're muted now.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing the course. I would very much like to do the course. I think in the yoga, especially, I've had glimpses of where my body has been very relaxed, and I felt that I was moving in a very natural way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is, so I feel like I've kind of glimpsed that energy, which you feel. From a mental point of view, I have great difficulties imagining that, and I think I find it very difficult to let go of having to have this very, very strong notion of who I am and what I am, and this is me and this is my personality, as opposed to just living, if you see what I mean. And part of me is afraid of that, because I think, well, what would be the ultimate goal? And would we all be just mush? Would we all be the same? We just all be, you know what I mean?
To a certain extent, you've answered the question for yourself, because in the moments in your practice when you feel this lightness and freedom, your mind has already let go. And what you've noticed is a positive experience.
I get that, and I understand that, but I don't know. Part of me is reluctant to give up this old way of everything is about your personality and who you are, came from, and where you're going, and what you've succeeded in and what you haven't succeeded. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, but again, go back to the physical. This is why the physical yoga is such a wonderful framework to work with. When your body felt, as you described, those glimpses, was this a positive feeling or a negative feeling?
Very, very positive. Yeah.
You'd given up the old patterns of needing to hold, needing to be strong, needing to push, needing to brace, needing to resist the tension. And it was a positive experience. And that's a wonderful analogy and metaphor, if you like, for what happens in the mind at this, developing in the same way. We don't need the same identity of shape. We don't need, the mental shape is, if you like, what you might be describing there as personality or who I am. It's something that's constructed rather than that comes from the practice. You made shapes in the yoga, but you didn't intentionally make shapes at that time, but they were there. So your personality will come through, mentally, when the mind's relaxed, without you having to make the personality be there. You don't need to be that person, you simply are that person.
What if that person is bad? No, but
This is why it's wholesome body, wholesome mind, because the process that you've described that enables you to come into that sense of body is one where the unwholesome is given up.
That underneath this all, there isn't a badness. There isn't a badness at our core. There are habits that we have that can be unwholesome, and they get softened away. So that the things that the aspects of personality, if you like, that you're thinking of in that way, that start to be reduced. The thing, if I think about myself, I used to have habits of being overwhelmed, and I'd feel like I had a collapsing mind, and then it would lead to real heaviness, and then it would lead to tears, and it could go on for quite some time. Well, that doesn't really happen very much anymore. So it's something I was very, very familiar with for years. And I can, you know, there's sometimes there are aspects of that, but nothing like what I used to inhabit. This is good. I'm glad that one has been softened away. But there are other aspects that are still quite current that I would like to be less dominant. And they're like my current challenges. So the things that that you would initially see change will be absolutely for your benefit and well-being. There's no question about it. You'll start to feel more in balance and more peaceful, and that definitely feels better. But I saw, for example, just the other day, a mum, and you know, I know this is relevant to you, and she posted about how her daughter was just going off to uni, and she said, how am I going to cope? I should be crying for 1 week. 1 week of crying. And that's just the start of it. We don't have to cry for 1 week. This is something that we can learn to stabilize and balance. It doesn't mean that we don't miss our children. It doesn't mean that we are kind of feeling a little bit lost in this big transition as they move away. But we can do the parenting bit, the smiling, the meeting the tension, and learning to bring ourselves back into balance. And then we're not suffering as much. This is really, really wholesome. And it doesn't mean that we have no emotion anymore, but it means there's a turnaround. So I've got my daughter, I've got to take her to university this week, and I'm feeling a bit of that, oh, I'm not going to see her for 10 weeks. Oh, I'm not really liking this coming along. Oh, relax, smile, and it's giving me more capacity to be more there for her expansion and leaving me, rather than being self-absorbed that I'm being left behind and left alone. And so it's an internal shift towards the wholesome, and it feels good. I'm going to have to practice with it. I'm going to have to stay stable, feeling the earth, and stay smiling, and there may still be tears. It's not that I'm emotionally completely absent, but yeah, sorry.
So just to pick up a little bit from what Sarah's there, this isn't an attempt to create perfection. This is much more a phrase that we often use, which is developing the confidence to be imperfect. And with that sense of imperfection and the recognition of the imperfection comes a humility. We see our flaws, we don't hide from them. But with that comes, if you like, the confidence to do something, you know, to move in a direction about those flaws or those challenges or difficulties. And this confidence is not an arrogance. It gives us the capacity, coupled with the humility, to learn. If you're not humble, you can't learn. You know, it's quite simple. And we all have a lot of learning to do. This process is like a spiral. It's constantly moving forward in a spiral. And there are times when we feel in the ascendant, and there's times when we feel in the descendant. But you cannot get a constant ascendant. It's not a linearity. And so this process is critical to moving forward and creating the stability that Sarah's describing. Any other questions?
I will have a look at the website, but just wondered if you could say what we do next if we'd like to go ahead.
If you'd like to attend the course, well, first of all, drop us an email, and the details. I haven't gone into the details yet, but they're all on the website. Around that, it's a nine-month commitment, a weekend a month, and we've designed it to be online, but as things open up and if it's appropriate, then we can do some of it face-to-face. But it's not, you know, if someone was working remotely further away, it's not essential to do face-to-face, because everything that we've worked with over the last 18 months, we've worked with ways to make the online experience constructive and helpful. So drop us a line, and we're happy to discuss that with you and move forward.
Thank you. Thanks.
Anything else? I notice we're a little bit over.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us.